and act on behalf of the non-U.S. company while he's there. Because if he does, we have a risk of having a U.S. permanent establishment, thereby subjecting the earnings of the foreign company to U.S. tax, which is what we were trying to avoid in the first place by setting up the corporation. So that's the tension. Now, I have to tell you one more thing, because this really surprises people. Remember what I said about a state and federal system? Well, we have an income tax treaty that basically protects foreign companies from most industrialized nations from being taxed in the U.S. It requires a fairly high standard of activity by the foreign company before that happens. The states are not party to that. The state of California is not party to that income tax treaty. So you can theoretically do everything right and avoid having a bad tax result as a federal matter, but all of a sudden get a bill from the state of California. It happens all the time. So it's something to keep in mind. Like I said, it's always two issues, even in taxation. So we've decided to incorporate. You want to enter the market, you want to hire some people, you want to start soliciting funding, then the question is, where would you incorporate? I'm from California. My main office is in Palo Alto. I have offices in San Francisco and Los Angeles, but I stay in California. I practice in Nevada, but I don't go there very often. 80% of the companies I form are in Delaware. 80%. Why is that? Anybody know? What's that? Well, it is true that Delaware doesn't tax non-resident companies, but there's a bigger reason. There's a bigger reason, and I'm sure you guys probably went through this when you did your funding. The VCs very much prefer Delaware. First of all, it's a very certain corporate law. It doesn't have some of the peculiarities of other states, such as California. And the biggest part, though, is they allow, in Delaware, they allow, they don't have the concept of class voting. In other words, in Delaware, a majority of the shareholders of a company could force the company to sell. In California, that's not true. It would take a majority of each class, meaning it would take a majority of the founders and the other common stockholders, and a majority of the preferred stockholders, the venture capitalists. Meaning that a California corporation, the founders could block a sale. And sometimes, somebody mentioned the U.S. is a great place for an exit. It's very true. But sometimes that exit isn't always a happy event for the founders. It might just bring back just enough money for the VCs. And the founders and the common stockholders might say, well, we're not going to vote for that. Well, in Delaware, they don't have to. As long as a majority of all the shares do, it can be rammed down their throats, basically. Now, there's other considerations, but as a legal matter, that's why you will almost always see Delaware. There's really only one, maybe two. There's really only two considerations, two entities that you would form. And the only reason I really have this slide is because I want to tell you about another technique that I'm using more and more, and I'm seeing more and more, and I actually think is very slick. So normally, we would form a corporation. Separate taxable entity, all the income of that U.S. corporation is going to be subject to U.S. tax, but we're going to do some planning and minimize the amount of income that stays there, at least for the short term. Let's suppose that I had somebody just 2 days ago in Bratislava tell me, well, gee, you know what I want to do is I have a big customer in the U.S., and I want to ship my product there, and I want to do business there, but I don't want to form an office there yet. I want to form a corporation. I want to set up an office. I don't want to hire people. I just want to ship. And you know what they told me is they'd rather do business with a U.S. company. Does that mean I have to form a U.S. corporation now, and I have to be subject to tax there? And you will find that. You will find a lot of U.S. companies really prefer, you know, that purchase order to be issued to a U.S. company. So one strategy is to form what they call a limited liability company, which is really, for tax purposes, a big nothing. You know, for tax purposes, it's a big nothing. It's not separately taxable. For corporate law purposes, it is a U.S. entity. And one strategy is to have that single member limited liability company enter into those contracts. And that minimizes the tax exposure, provides liability protection, and satisfies the business need. It's a strategy we use very often. And when you think of single member LLC, back in the late 80s, when I practiced in New York, we used to work with Liechtenstein Stichtings a lot. It's a lot like that, sort of a big transparent entity. So the next question that you're going to have is transfer pricing, once you do have that US company.